everybody. Could I have you start taking your seats in the next minute or two? Thank you all for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the University of Utah, Rice-Eccles Stadium, the Ken Garff Club. My name is Taylor Randall. I'm the president here at the university, and we're just thrilled to have all of you. On Saturday, this room was absolutely full of football fans. Today, I think we'll have an equally exciting set of conversations. It's just really my privilege to welcome you, but also be the first to thank the GenerationAll team for getting this organized. Could we give them a round of applause? We're thrilled to have Dr. Nadine Burke Harris here today. So glad that you're here, Dr. Frank Anderson and Elizabeth Smart. We are so glad for your advocacy in this area, particularly the conversations that they will lead today around childhood trauma. We are hoping that today is more than just simply a conversation, but a call to action for all of us. These topics are near and dear to us as a university. I want to give you a little bit of background with respect to mental health generally and our university. We are the glad and happy hosts and sponsors of the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, which is focusing on all causes of mental distress in our lives. I will say, as a university president, I have felt that there are 4 threats to the future of both American higher education and I think our nation in general, and one of those is adolescent development and mental health. The causes for the decline are varied. Certainly, many of those are adolescent stress and childhood trauma. When we do a survey of our students, this is now 2 years old, and I'm hoping it was very much COVID-induced. We had 10,000 students respond to a survey assessing their anxiety levels and their levels of depression, and about 50% of them would have been classified as severely to moderately depressed. And again, as you dig into the causes of that, they are deep. And in fact, in any given week, 1 in 5 report missing a productive student activity due to their mental health situation. So irrespective of the causes and where it is coming from, we have to cope and deal with it as a society. We are committed as a university to do that. GenerationAll's efforts in leading those conversations and fostering all of us as a society to get better is applaudable, and I just appreciate all of them coming today. It's now my privilege to introduce to you John Miller, who of course is making a lot of this happen. Please welcome John to this stand.
Well, thank you, President Randall. We're so honored to have the President provide this facility for us here today and to make some introductions. And starting it off with some significant comments about the reason we're here today. I'm honored that you took the time out of your busy schedule to speak on such an important event and be an advocate, President. So thank you from all of us at GenerationAll and from everybody here. My name is John Miller, as President mentioned, and I'm honored to be here on behalf of my family and our organization, GenerationAll, which we started as an organization to bring awareness and advocacy for policy and to help families heal from the sexual abuse and childhood trauma that so often paralyzes families for generations. Many of you know that our work began after sharing our family story in a book we released almost a year ago called Hometown Betrayal. What started out as a vehicle for healing our family has turned into a powerful yet heartbreaking example of the impact of childhood trauma and its generational impact for multiple generations. And what's been interesting to me over the past year, the book was released a year ago. We've had hundreds of people who have written comments in terms of reviews and letters, and people who have called who have had similar experiences and have been able to step forward and share those experiences and be more vocal about it so that we can bring greater awareness to our communities and families. This event today is about bringing people together, and so I want to especially thank each one of you for making the effort and time to be here and to participate with us. All of us can make a measurable difference in helping prevent and heal from childhood trauma and sexual abuse. If we look around the group, we have some very incredible people here today: experts, survivors, advocates, families, and community members, nonprofits, and government agencies. And we need all of us working together to make a change that can really break the cycle of not only sexual abuse, but its aftermath, which is generational trauma. I won't burden you with any more, but I'm happy now to introduce our speakers so we can get right into this. And you're gonna love this program today. The three speakers we have are so fantastic in every way, and so we want to thank them for taking the time and being here and sharing with us what they've learned and the things that they're working to make our families and the society a better place. Our first speaker hardly needs an introduction. Elizabeth Smart is someone I've admired for decades, and despite not knowing her until the last few years, I've felt connected to her and her story like so many of us in this room. Her strength and grace and resilience have inspired people all over the world, and she continues to be a representation of this to thousands that look up to her today. There are a lot of things I admire about Elizabeth, but her continuous advocating for survivors is something I personally admire. Elizabeth, many of you may know, wrote the foreword to the book Hometown Betrayal. And her words perfectly capture the courage it takes to be able to step forward and deal with the reality that many of the survivors go through. So we want to thank you again, Elizabeth, for being here and helping us at GenerationAll. Let me read a little bit about her bio, which I know all of you know, but I want to read it anyway. The abduction of Elizabeth Smart was one of the most followed child abduction stories in cases of our time. Elizabeth was abducted in June 5th, 2002, and endured daily sexual assault, starvation, and abuse for 9 months. Elizabeth returned back to her family on March 2nd, 2003, and went on to testify before her captors, which led to their convictions. Through this experience, Elizabeth has become an advocate for change and has helped promote the International Amber Alert System, the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, and other safety legislation to help prevent abductions. She founded the Elizabeth Smart Foundation in 2011. Please join me in giving a rousing welcome to Elizabeth Smart.
Great to be here. I literally grew up here. I may or may not have snuck into this stadium and had a kiss on the 50-yard line at some point in time. Maybe not. No, but I grew up right here. I mean, I could have walked to my neighborhood from here. Although I didn't attend the University of Utah, I feel like I kind of did because I was always here. My home was here. My friends all came here. I studied harp from the head of the University of Utah harp department. So it feels like being home right now. And actually, speaking of home, I think would probably most of us agree that home is our haven. When things seem to be going bad, you just want to go home. When you're having a really bad day, you just want to go to bed and pull the covers over your head. And I feel so lucky because my home is still my safe place. Many people think that my story ended after I was rescued, but my story did not end. It's still going on, but I was so lucky because I was never doubted. I was never questioned over what I said happened. I mean, yes, I went to trial, and sure, there were some questions there. But the vast majority of people, and I will make the caveat, there's always, conspiracy theorists and outliers who, I don't know, have crazy ideas, but the vast majority of people have always believed me. I came home to a complete family. My parents were both actively involved in my life, making sure I was safe, making sure I was healthy, making sure all my brothers and my sister, making sure that all of us had a safe life, making sure that we had all of our necessities met, that we didn't want for anything. And my parents, they tried to bring in therapists to have family counseling. They encouraged me to go to counseling. I mean, it's a long story, and I was warned I only have a certain amount of time, so I won't go into all the details. But I was given so much support. My friends' parents, they told my friends, do not question Elizabeth about what happened. Do not talk to her about what happened. Before I came to school, the teachers told my classmates, do not ask questions. Just meet her where she's at, accept her where she's at. And what a difference that made for me. I had no idea that that was not the norm. And actually, I did not realize that for years. I thought in my little brain that what I had been through was the worst thing that anyone could go through. And how could anyone possibly understand that? Because nobody else was there with me, because the topic of sexual violence, rape, abuse, those weren't commonly talked about conversations. I didn't hear anyone talk about it, so I didn't know how common it was. I thought that I was one of the very few who it had happened to. But as time went on, I began to meet other survivors. And my dad, the trailblazer that he is, he never just sat back and let life continue on. I mean, I feel like every legislative season there was, He would be up at the Capitol trying to help promote bills to try to protect children, to try to make harsher sentencing for predators. I mean, felt like he was up there all the time. If there was a child missing, he was immediately calling the parents, asking how he could help. And little by little, I became more involved with him. And that's how I began to meet more and more survivors. And as I heard survivors' stories, I was shocked. And I realized that I was not the only one. And the more stories that I heard, the more I realized that I was actually so lucky. I was so lucky that I was kidnapped by a stranger. I was so lucky that I was abused by a stranger. Because when I go home at night after I was rescued, now as a kid, like after I was rescued, before I was rescued, I never ever had to worry about who was going to crawl into bed next to me. I never was worried about who I was left with. I don't think my parents actually ever left us with anyone, to be honest, even before my kidnapping. But I never had those fears. I never worried whether or not I was going to have dinner. I was never scared to go home. I was never scared. Home was always and has always been a safe haven to me. And I say all these things because I cannot imagine how much more difficult it would be to try to heal, to try to move forward, if the very people who are supposed to protect you are the ones hurting you. And I can't imagine how impossible it would feel to want to engage in not even intimate relationships, but just relationships, period, in trying to rebuild trust in humanity again after being violated so deeply. I can't imagine how difficult that would be. And to be scared even as you get older, to leave your house, because what if you see your perpetrator? What if he's waiting there for you? What if he's looking for you, or she, whoever it is? How difficult would that be to live a life that way? As I continued after my rescue, I became involved in trying to fight against child sexual abuse material, and that really got me thinking, what would it be like, having experienced everything that I'd experienced, but what would it be like to walk down the street and have people smile at you and not know if they're smiling at you because they're just being friendly, or smiling at you because they watched you being raped and they enjoyed it? How horrific would that be? How impossible would that be? So all of these experiences helped me realize actually how unextraordinary my personal experience was. And I felt like my experience was definitely out of the ordinary. I felt like it was, felt like world altering, and it was, but also, it just felt like so big and so much. But after being rescued and experiencing all these other things and listening to so many other survivors, I realized that my story is not so common. Here in the state of Utah, 1 in 3 women are sexually abused. If you're a student, you're 2 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than you are to be robbed. These are terrible, terrible statistics, terrible numbers. And I am pro all safety education. I'm not saying there isn't safety education that we shouldn't be taught, and I've used this example before, but I'm going to use it again, so bear with me. How many of you know what to do if you catch on fire? Yeah, thank you. Stop, drop, and roll. Okay, thank you. Has anybody used that? If you could raise your hand. Ooh, there's 1. 2. Oh, President. I'd like to hear that story. Thank you. So there's 2 people in this whole crowded room. I won't ask for survivors to raise their hand, but I know I'm not the only survivor in this room. And anyone outside of the business, because I see some of my friends here from other organizations, so anyone outside of the world, day in and day out, of working in anti-sexual exploitation, anti-abuse, does anybody else know what to do if you're raped? Was anyone ever taught that in school alongside stop, drop, and roll? You can raise your hand if you did. No one. No one's raising their hand. And yet, there's 2 people in here who raise their hand for stop, drop, and roll. Again, I'm not going to ask, but if you just think 1 in 3 here in Utah, there's a lot of women here today. 1 in 3, that's a lot. I had no idea it was that common, and I think we can do better. I know we can do better. I think that's why we're all here today. So going through my story a little bit, certainly the night I was kidnapped was shocking. I went to bed like any other night. And I mean, again, I grew up here. I grew up in the Federal Heights neighborhood, a stone's throw away from here, a nice neighborhood. Nothing like that had ever happened, at least not that I knew of. I mean, I grew up playing night games like kick the can in the street and hide and go seek. I mean, that's what we played with the neighbor kids in our neighborhood because we thought it was a safe place. None of us ever thought anything bad would happen. And I certainly never expected to hear anyone in my bedroom in the middle of the night. But I'll never forget hearing, "Don't make a sound, I have a knife at your neck, get up and come with me." I will never forget hearing those words. And at first, I thought it couldn't be real because I was at home, I was in my safe place, I was in my bed, like the safest place you can imagine. And yet it still happened to me there. And when the voice repeated again, I remember feeling something cold and sharp lying across my neck. I remember someone's hand on my arm trying to pull me out of bed. And honestly, that was the first time that I actually knew what it was to be afraid. I remember he took me up into the mountains, literally just there, I think. Maybe there. But like right here. And I remember being brought into this hidden campsite where part of the mountainside had been leveled out, and there's a tent set up, and I remember this woman walking out, and actually when I first saw this woman, I was relieved because I thought if there's a woman here, then nothing that terrible can happen. I mean, in my innocent little brain, I tried to come up with every possible innocent reason as to why someone would kidnap someone else. I'm not sure there is a reason, but I tried to tell myself well, maybe they had a daughter and maybe she died and they're so heartbroken. I was 14. I don't know what else to say. But I remember she brought me inside the tent. She sat me down on this upturned bucket. She started to undress me. I was very shy. I was very self-conscious. And I remember just begging her and pleading her to leave me alone. She did pass me a robe, and she told me to put it on, and I did. And then she scooped up my clothes, and she turned around, and she walked out of the tent. And I remember sitting on that upturned bucket just wondering what was going to happen next. Why was this happening to me? Why would anyone kidnap me? There was nothing special about me. There was nothing different about me. Why would anyone want to kidnap me? And I remember the tent door opening up, and in came this man. And he had changed out of the sweat clothes that he wore when he kidnapped me, and he had put on a long robe, just like the one the woman had on, just like the one I'd been forced to put on. And he knelt down next to me, and that's when he told me that I was now his wife. Of course, I didn't expect to ever hear that. I remember screaming out, "No," and he just looked at me and said, "If you ever scream out like that again, I'll kill you. If it'll help you to not scream out, I can duct tape your mouth shut." And I remember then trying to explain to him why this wasn't okay. I told him I wouldn't scream, but he had to realize this wasn't okay. You couldn't just kidnap someone and then marry them. It wasn't legal. I was 14. I never said yes. I never agreed to it. Words alone weren't enough to make this a reality. And honestly, every excuse that I came up with, he had the same response, which was, "It's now time to consummate our marriage." I didn't know what that meant. I'd never heard that phrase before. And I sat there wondering, what on earth does he mean? And I had this thought come to my mind, and I remember thinking, there's no way There's no way that one human being can possibly be that evil to do that to another human being. Unfortunately, I found out that those people do exist, because it didn't matter what I said, and it didn't matter how much I begged or pleaded or cried. Ultimately, he forced me on the ground and raped me. And when he was finished, he stood up and smiled and turned around and walked out of the tent. For me, that was so devastating. I mean, physically, I was in a lot of pain. I mean, I remember seeing the blood run down my legs. But emotionally, like, I'd just been ripped from my family, but also, honestly, spiritually. I mean, I grew up here in Utah. I grew up going to church every single Sunday, even when we went on vacation. And I don't know how many lessons I listened to about chastity and purity and virtue, and they all seemed to mean the same thing, which was don't have sex before marriage. And I'm not here to tell anyone what to believe or what not to believe. However, if you are going to teach about sexuality, you also need to include sexual violence, abuse. You need to talk about consent. You need to talk about what a healthy relationship was, because that was not taught to me. So here I am, this little 14-year-old girl, just being kidnapped, just having been raped, not knowing that there was a difference, thinking that because I had been raped, I was unworthy, I was unlovable, that if my parents knew what had happened to me, they wouldn't want me anymore, that if the rest of the world knew what had happened to me, nobody would search for me anymore, that it wouldn't be worth surviving because I would just turn into a pariah because I was no longer of value or worth. And that's exactly what I felt. So whatever you believe is fine, whatever you choose to engage in is fine, as long as it's legal and there is ongoing, active consent. I'd say excited consent. I mean, if there's any body language that's even mildly hesitant, just don't. It's not worth it. Just don't. So that's a very important conversation that I feel very passionate about. But that wasn't the end of my story. I remember at that point, I actually don't remember if I fell asleep or passed out, but the next thing I do remember was opening my eyes, and there this man was kneeling over me, and he had a piece of metal cable, and he was wrapping around my ankle, and then he was crushing bolts into place so that I couldn't run away. And I remember standing up to see what I was chained in between, and I was chained in between two trees and had just enough movement to lie down inside the tent and just enough movement to stand up and use the bucket. And that was it. And I remember just looking around this tent, wondering how I was going to survive, wondering if there was going to be a chance to escape, wondering what was happening at home, just so many questions. And again, why? Why did all of this happen to me? And I remember as I sat there realizing that they might plan on keeping me for a long time. And how was I going to survive a long time? How was I going to make it through another day? A lot of people have accused me of having Stockholm Syndrome over the years, which I don't know if anybody knows this, but Stockholm Syndrome, in my opinion, it's not real. We do what we have to do to survive. And that is what I did. I remember that first day making the decision that I was going to do whatever it took. It didn't matter what it was. If it meant that I would live another day, then that was exactly what I was going to do. And that's how I survived every single day. It was doing what they wanted. It was doing it honestly, I don't want to say willingly, but willingly, so that I could survive. I recognized the danger that my captors, the threat that they posed to me. They had successfully gotten into my home, a safe home, a nice neighborhood. My parents were sleeping just a room away from me. My sister was in the same bed as me. He got into my house, kidnapped me without anyone sounding the alarm. Probably one of the after I was rescued, I was told it was the biggest search that was ever put on for a missing child since the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. And I was still not found. I remember airplanes flying overhead. I remember helicopters flying so close that the trees around us shook. And I was never found. And it was months and months of abuse. It was being forced to go naked day in, day out, being raped multiple times a day, being forced to do things that, well, first of all, I'd never even heard about because I lived quite a sheltered life, but also doing things that I had promised myself I was never going to do. Things like drinking alcohol. Like, I remember going through the DARE program in 5th grade, not even sure if it's still a thing, but I remember going through that, and like they had us do the pledge, and I remember signing the pledge, and I remember thinking to myself, I am never going to do drugs or alcohol because I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't. But I also remember being kidnapped and thinking, this doesn't actually matter. Like, if this helps me live till tomorrow, then I'm going to do it. Because if I didn't, he'd always tell me that he would hurt me. And he followed through with his threats. He absolutely followed through with threats. Every time he came up with some new way to punish me, I used to think, this is it, this is the worst. There can be nothing worse than this. But I got to a point where I had to stop thinking that, because every time he came up with something new, I would be freshly devastated. So I had to switch my thinking to, this is pretty bad, this is pretty terrible, but it could be worse. It could be worse. I'm going to be grateful that this is just as bad as it is, and it's not worse than this. And I'd actually try to find things that could make this situation worse. Ultimately, that is how I survived 9 months. And in my advocacy since then, I have just come to recognize, and repeating myself from earlier, there are so many survivors among us. Either you are one or you know one, whether you are aware of it or not. We all know and are affected by survivors. And again, probably the 2 biggest differences in my story from everyone else's story is, number 1, that all my abuse came at the hands of a stranger, because most children, most people, know their perpetrators, are familiar with them. Many of them are within that circle of trust. And I'd say the biggest difference, the second biggest difference, is that I was believed, is that I was supported, is that I was loved, and I had a network and a healing place to come back home to, surrounded by people who would have fought tooth and nail for me to protect me. Those are probably the 2 biggest differences between my story and every other story out there, which is why I feel compelled to continue on in advocacy, but also incredibly honored to be here today, to be a part of GenerationAll, because it affects all of us. Every single one of us has been affected, whether we know it or not. And every survivor deserves to be able to come home to a safe place, to have a safe community around them, and they deserve to be believed no matter what. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. Thank you for coming here and supporting this incredible organization today, and God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was inspiring and so well spoken. Our next speaker today is Dr. Frank Anderson. He is someone I've come to know deeply, to respect, not only as one of the leading trauma experts in our country, but also as a friend. He's a psychiatrist, an author, an educator who brings both scientific understanding and deep compassion to his work. Our director at GenerationAll saw him speak earlier this year and was amazed that he could be talking about such difficult topics and yet simultaneously making people laugh. His perspective on trauma and healing is from one of the most inspirational I have seen, and I'm excited to have him with us today. I spent an afternoon, actually a lunch with Frank when I first met you in Los Angeles, probably 6 months or a year ago, I'm not sure. But I left with the thought that here was a man who obviously was extremely bright, but was very vulnerable and compassionate, and a man whose love for others really spoke as you radiated with him as you spent time with him. So Frank, we're really grateful to have you here today, and we're grateful for the partnership we're working on to have with you in the future. Here's Frank's bio. Frank Anderson, MD, is a world-renowned trauma expert, Harvard-trained psychiatrist, and global speaker. He is the co-author of IFS Skills Training Manual in 2017, acclaimed best-selling author of Transcending Trauma in 2021, and newly released memoir, To Be Loved, A Story of Truth, Trauma, and Transformation in 2024. Dr. Anderson has a long affiliation with Bessel van der Kolk at the Trauma Research Foundation. You might recall Bessel wrote, The Body Keeps the Score. He is a partner with Frank, and Frank's passionate about teaching brain-based psychiatry and psychotherapy, integrating current neuroscience knowledge with cutting-edge models of therapy. Dr. Anderson believes that traumatic events have a lasting effect on the brain and health and well-being of individuals, and addressing these events can help lead people down a path of love, connection, and purity and unity. He is the director and co-founder of the Trauma Institute and Trauma Informed Media, organizations that provide educational resources and personal journey transformation. He is dedicated to bringing more trauma healing to the world. He resides in Los Angeles with his husband and 2 sons. You can follow him at frankandersonmd.com and on Instagram on Frank_AndersonMD. Frank, we'd love to have you come up and join us. Give him a big hand.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Welcome, welcome. It's lovely to be here. When I hear that bio, I don't know who the heck he's talking about, because that doesn't feel like me at all. What I will say, Elizabeth's story was so inspiring and so activating in some ways for me. Someone who did go through the abuse in the home. So I'm aware of the range of experiences for everyone, and some of us have been through overwhelming life experiences by a stranger, by somebody who we don't know, and some of us, many of us also, have been through experiences by someone who is near and dear and supposed to be safe. I'd like to just take a minute before I dive in here to just let you all go inside for a moment and just notice what's happening for you in this moment. Because the story Elizabeth shared is so powerful. We're not here to compare traumas, but we all have had overwhelming life experiences. So just take a moment and just notice what's happening inside for you. Maybe it's stirring up memories from someone that's close to you. Maybe it's bringing up some of your memories of your own traumas. Just know that we can hold space together, that healing happens with love and connection, and let whatever is showing up right now know that we can hold space. When you feel ready, you can shift your attention back to our shared space. What is trauma? I get asked this question all the time. And yes, trauma and neuroscience can be fun. I don't know why that is true, but it's been the case for me in all of my teaching. Partly because I think I've healed enough that I'm able to hold it and take in the joy and the love that is so present all around us. It's that combination that I think is really powerful for me. In my story, with what my trauma was, I grew up in this Italian family in the south side of Chicago, and we had some of the most amazing moments making wine, making homemade pasta, canning tomatoes. I had such beautiful, wonderful memories as kind of the only 100% Italian Sicilian kid, probably in the whole city of Chicago, for what I was aware of. I was surrounded by a bunch of Irish people, and their whole live stream was to go to Notre Dame someday. So I totally felt like this outsider. I didn't belong at all. Everybody had Southside Irish jackets on, yet I had these amazing experiences of making tomatoes, and my grandmother used to say, God made fingers before forks. Put your forks down. Let's like really have a meal together. So I had some beautiful moments and horrific, terrifying moments in the middle of the night, running through the house, being chased, only learning at my dad's deathbed that I started getting hit as a baby in the crib. So my trauma history goes way back, and it was really confusing. Like some of the best moments of my life and some of the most horrific moments of my life. I used to have this repetitive dream of this witch-like figure standing over a crib pretty much most of my life, not knowing what in the world that was about until probably 3 years ago when I understood that, oh wow, that wasn't some kind of figment of my imagination. That actually really happened. So I hold trauma at a very early age in my body and in my cells, and it really is a violation of the self. There's a chasm, a split that occurs when we experience something overwhelming. And there's a split between the self of us back then and the parts of us that endure the trauma. The good news is, folks, that can be healed. That is one of the reasons I'm like, why am I up here with Elizabeth Smart and Nadine Burke Harris? Like, what am I doing here? I'm doing here because I know trauma healing from the inside out. You don't become a Harvard-trained psychiatrist with all of those accolades because it's fun and interesting. Like, that is not why someone becomes a trauma expert. Let me tell you, it's because of my journey and tenacity and resilience to not let this take over my life. And I want to say that that is possible for every single person in this room, no matter what you have been through. It is energy that doesn't belong to you and is not yours to carry. And it is energy that can be released. And I have been releasing that energy for most of my life. And I really want to get that message out to everyone that we all can do the same thing. I don't think I'm special. I think I've been working at it longer, and and healing is possible for everyone. So that's really my message. Frequency, intensity, and duration. An overwhelming life experience beyond our human capacity to hold. Like, raise your hand if you haven't had an overwhelming life experience. That's what I figured. Like, we all have. Some people get really get an allergy to the word trauma. Like, if you're a baby boomer, my kids told me I am, apparently. I'm the last 2 years of the baby boomer generation. Baby boomers hate the word trauma. Not me, I'm tough, I'm strong. If you're a Gen Z, you're sneezing and you have a trauma, right? So it depends on the generation of what you've been through and what we hold generationally and culturally as to what your relationship is to your overwhelming life experience, right? I think about frequency, I think about intensity, I think about duration. What happened to you is the trauma that you absorbed, but even more important is how you perceived it, what you did in your mind to survive it, how we have to make meaning, Elizabeth's story is so clear. When perpetrators don't take responsibility for their actions, kids do 100% of the time. We have to make meaning. And when nobody tells us what it's about, we blame ourselves. That's what we do. We all do it. So what did you perceive? How did you respond to it? And who was with you or not? Not only during, more importantly is after. Because most of us have transgenerational relational trauma, and we hold it in isolation. We walk downstairs in the morning and sit at that kitchen table with nobody saying anything. And we're holding whatever happened by ourselves. The good news is the goals for trauma treatment, we release the energy that doesn't belong to us. It's a bummer though, permanent healing doesn't exist. This really kind of pissed me off. I thought, I'm a therapy lifer. I've been going to therapy starting at 6 years of age, still in therapy, not with the same person. I switch up every once in a while, try something new. I was in therapy in my residency 5 times a week for 11 years. Okay, I am constantly trying and thinking I'm going to get there someday, it's going to be all over, and that is not the way it works. My experience is we release what we carry, and then our energy vibration elevates, and we live life, and then something comes up again, and we deal with that level at that energy level, and we learn something new, and then we elevate again. So I don't think we're ever done, and I think we're constantly learning. Every moment we repeat, we repress, or we grow and evolve from it. And that is our choice. We have a choice in every movement. Every moment we have a choice. The other thing that was kind of a bummer for me around trauma healing was I had this idea like do your work, release your trauma, and then you skip down the lane going off into the sunset. It's like, damn, that doesn't happen either. Like you release your energy and in fact you have to show up differently today, right now. And that is really challenging. Even when you release the energy, you are still confronted with those moments of not being a people pleaser, those moments of speaking up in conflict. I still struggle with it, but I do it better, I recover quicker, and people respond differently because I show up differently. So we all, just because we've done our work, we still have to show up, which takes courage on a daily basis. Here's my current list of traumas, and I say current because this list keeps growing, okay? Because of more and more awareness of what is happening in our world and the division that occurs so profoundly in the worlds in which we live. So there's acute trauma, there's chronic PTSD, relational or complex trauma. This is where I've spent most of my life's work. Pre-verbal, attachment, developmental, and traumas of the self. I believe that traumas that are sexual violations, that violate our gender, our orientation, are traumas of the self. Traumas of race. They're not parts of us, they are who we are. When we experience one of those traumas of the self, it can change you. And what I want everybody to know, it doesn't have to change you permanently. But it does have an effect of how you see yourself, how you identify yourself as a person in the world. Family legacy, transgenerational trauma, which I'll be spending more time talking about, institutional, religious, medical, marginalized traumas, where you're in a marginalized group in our culture and society. I don't really know anyone who, number one, has safe and secure attachment only. This idea of secure attachment, they're not my friends. They're just not my friends. I don't know. Do we have places of safe and secure attachment with certain aspects of safe and secure people? Absolutely. Do we also have anxious connections with anxious parts of other people? Yes. Do we have disorganized attachment? Yes. Do we have avoidant attachment? I think we all have all of those, right? Everyone feels less than or not part of the group. We all hold some form of marginalization within our sense of who we are. That's a universal experience, in my experience. Cultural, society, and global. When people raise their hand and say they haven't been in any trauma, I'm like, have you been through the pandemic? Like, you're in our group now. Welcome aboard. We'd love to have you. We have to look at intersectionality. When we start accumulating our list, it gets pretty darn long. We have to look at the ways culture influences our institutional experiences, the way intersects with individuals and our family messages and legacies. When you start mapping this stuff out, folks, it gets complicated for all of us. This is not easy, and we all have many when you start looking at that list and recording them. This is my map. You don't have to look at it, but I throw out my map, right? And we all have a map. Everybody has their own map, right? And I want you to think about for a moment, what's your map? What traumas have you gone through? What overwhelming life experiences have you been through? I kind of feel like that's why we're here having a human experience. I wish we learned better in good times. For some odd reason, we learn much more potently through adversity. And that is part of why we're here. And so take a moment and think about your list. I was talking to someone last night at the dinner at John's house. It's like, I had a really good family. I had a great experience. Nothing bad happened to me. I just couldn't help myself. I was like, have you ever been shamed before? He's like, well, hundreds of times. And I'm like, welcome to the club. You know, like even when we think it's only all good, that isn't reality. Like that isn't the way life is. Holding the complexity of the good and the bad is super hard for kids, but we all have been through both. Transgenerational trauma, specifically here, family legacy. Nobody is free and clear of this one either, folks. We all grew up in families of one form or another, and we all absorb the messages from our families. In my message, my family, the boys had to make money. The boys had to be smart. The girls needed to look pretty and take care of the men, and that's what their job was. And if they wanted to go to college, it was kind of extra. That was some of the messages. If you saw in my trauma chart, the word mafia was there. I grew up with a mafia family. Like, I thought that was normal. That's what I grew up with. And I was terrified when we would sit at the dining room table hearing about the way Uncle Johnny's gas station got blown up, the way Uncle Nino's car is gone. Don't ask any questions. I had stories at my kitchen table around terrifying things that the mafia would do if you were bad and if you didn't behave, right? Those were some of the messages. We all have an ethnic heritage. We have ancestral trauma, which is different than family legacy or transgenerational. The people that come for generations before us, not just our family lineage, but all the brown people before me, for example, right? All the Latinas before me. We hold these experiences in ourselves. We are born with transgenerational trauma. Epigenetics shows us, Ruth Lanius is a woman who did some amazing work showing that trauma gets passed down in the genes. And here's the good news, ladies. It's not all your fault, okay? Because when we think about schizophrenia, when I was in medical school, schizophrenia and all the attachment research is all about the moms and the women, right? Well, the good news is the men pass down transgenerational trauma in their sperm also. So it's not just the women's fault, it's also from the men. We all pass down genetic materials to our kids. My oldest son, who is biologically connected to me, we did surrogacy with him, has the same attachment trauma that I have. Now, yes, we did surrogacy with my son. He has a biological mother who he's in contact with, and he's not living with her. We were at his birth, so maybe his attachment trauma is connected to having a surrogate mom that he doesn't live with. But I also see the ways that my trauma gets played out in him. The good news is that's healable in good environments. Those are not permanent changes. Those methyl groups on those DNA strands are reversible and can be healed. Don't forget the gifts and the burdens that we pass on. I was also talking to someone last night at this event. She's like, oh my gosh, Frank, I like your work. I'm so afraid that I'm passing down trauma to my children. I'm so nervous as a parent. And I'm like, sorry, you are. And she was like, that was not what I was hoping you were going to say. And I'm like, well, it's actually true. We do it. We do it. And the more we deny it, the more painful it is for our kids because they'll take responsibility for it. So I don't like the way parents normalize losing it. Oh, I lose it, it's normal. No, you lose it because you got triggered, because your own trauma history is activated, and you're using perpetrator energy to stop your kids so that they won't activate your wounds. I'm going to say that again because that's complicated, and not everybody likes to hear that. When we lose it with our kids, and we all do, it's because they activate stuff within us that causes the energy of our abuse to show up to stop them so that they don't activate ours. Now, that's not the only reason we lose it in life. We're tired, we're overworked, we're stressed, but it's one of the reasons we lose it. And if we can take responsibility and own that, if we can have true repair, our kids won't take responsibility for it. So yes, it's going to happen, and what you do with it is super important also. It comes from family dysfunction. It comes from biological stuff. We pass down stuff genetically. We know some of these diseases, some of these medical conditions are passed down through the family, and some of them, which Nadine will talk more about, are the expression of unprocessed trauma. That emotion that we absorb, folks, doesn't just go away when we suppress it and deny it. It gets channeled in all other ways, like asthma, like ADHD, like fibromyalgia, amongst many things. That energy doesn't go away, so the more we can face it and be with it and heal it, the better off we are. It can be historical. It affects our parenting styles. Our transgenerational trauma affects the kinds of parents that we are. It affects our attachment relationships with our children. It impairs our ability to work through conflict. When I'm working with people, I say, how did your family handle fights? Nobody has a good story. oh my gosh, we do such an amazing job. We all sit down, we take responsibility for our part, we listen to everybody else's part, and then we light a candle and we sing Kumbaya, right? That is not what anybody says when I ask, how does your family handle conflict? We use anger protectively and destructively. And we need to learn that anger is a really helpful, important emotion because it helps us set boundaries. No is a really important self-protected boundary versus the way we use it in an attacked way. People, I used to not understand why. I have a friend of mine, David Kessler, who's a grief expert. He said, Frank, I'm a grief expert, and I became a trauma expert on the side. I'm like, David, I became a grief expert because I'm a trauma expert. You really can't have trauma without grief and loss. It's an inherent part of what we experience when we have something overwhelming because we lose those safe connections every time mom yells or dad is drunk or whatever happens in that family, you lose that safe connection. And if that happens thousands of times throughout your lifetime, you accumulate that stuff. And that's stored within us. Codependency, hypervigilance, attachment trauma, fear of loss, low self-esteem. These are some of the signs of transgenerational trauma. And yes, most of our ACE scores are connected to what we experience in our families and what gets passed down from generation to generation. I was going to name this new program that I'm kind of creating the Cycle Breakers because I feel like one of our biggest jobs here on earth is to break those cycles. And I feel like I've done a pretty good job breaking the cycle. But when I say cycle breaker too quickly, people are like, oh, cycle breaker? Your new program is cycle breaker? And I'm like, no, okay, I got to come up with a new name. However, we all can break these cycles. How many of you as parents have said, oh my God, I cannot believe I just said the very thing I promised I would never say, right? It's because we absorb the energy of those who have harmed us, just as we've absorbed the energy of being hurt by them. And that is a really painful reality that I feel like we all need to be aware of. Because what we tend to do in culture, in society, is other our shadow. We don't take responsibility for the ways we've harmed and the ways we harm. And if we keep doing that, we're going to keep creating a bigger and bigger divide in the world in which we live in. For some reason, I don't know why I'm drawn to this community. I keep coming back to Salt Lake City. There's divine intervention here that I was here last month. I was with the AV guy. He's like, you again? I'm like, yeah, sorry, I can't stay away. Partly I mention this two reasons. One is, I didn't think I was accepted here. I'm a gay person. I'm okay with that now. It took me 32 years to be okay with who I am. The first time I came here, I thought, uh-oh, these people are not going to like me. And that was so not the case. I was so welcomed here in this community in this beautiful, loving way because hearts connect with hearts. And the commonality of suffering is what is universal. We all have the resiliency of the human spirit, and we've all been through suffering. So I feel very at home here in this very strange kind of way. And I understand, and I'm not here to talk about this, what happens in the LDS community has a lot of beautiful, wonderful things, and there's a lot of shadow that has been put away and silenced. And that creates some of the similar kind of experiences that I grew up with, is the good and the bad juxtaposed, and how do we live with that and come to harmony with that? I talked about the epigenetic transmission. Some point you guys might be able to make your own family genogram. What were your grandparents like? Name the good and the bad, right? What were some of their gifts? What are some of their burdens? Notice the males are in squares and the females are in, I think this is a genetics thing I remember learning in genetics, I don't know. And then just start listing family generational characteristics and traits. These patterns start popping out at you. Oh, I learned that from my grandmother. Oh, that's the way my father taught me to be a man, right? And one of the things that's so important, folks, with transgenerational trauma is what percentage is yours and what percentage doesn't belong to you. We absorb these messages, and there's often a percentage when we're addressing legacy burdens. How much of this is mine? How much of this do I carry? How much of this do I really believe? How much of this do I use to keep myself small, to keep myself from being my authentic self? We all take these messages and we use them, some for good, the gifts, and some for not so good. There's a way to release those messages that don't belong to you. And there's also a way to take in the gifts that they give us, because most families are complicated, as we've talked about, in that way. Addressing loyalty is super important. I can't give this belief up because I'm going to lose the connection to my family. I say you can keep the connection without holding that message. There's a way to do both. And most people stay connected from a loyalty perspective because they're worried they're going to lose the connection. But those are two separate things. Resilience, I'll talk quickly about resilience and then healing, and then I'll let us move on to our next speaker. We heard such a beautiful story of resilience. I mean, I'm going to put it, if you're okay, Elizabeth, I'm going to put a picture of you in this slide moving forward. Like the resilience that she had in her cells, in her bones, partly because of the family that she grew up with, and partly because of who she is and what her purpose for this world is. It's so clear to me that your purpose is to help people heal trauma. I know, and now I'm grateful to my dad who yelled and screamed and beat me as a kid. I truly am grateful, because I wouldn't be standing up here on this stage with this group of people had it not been for him and what I had experienced. I really believe that now, but boy, it took me a whole lot of work to get there. One of the things I'm hoping for, I can't even count the number of therapy years that I've been in. It's too many to count, but I'm hoping to make it better so that you don't have to go through 40 years of therapy throughout your life in order to be standing up on a stage talking about healing. I think we can do better. I think we can make it more effective. We don't have enough people, and we haven't trained enough people to do the healing. I'm going to work on self-empowered healing, because I think trauma is a violation of ourself. And I don't think agencies or therapists or insurance companies should tell us how we should heal. I think we need to bring healing back into the hands of the people that were violated so they can be empowered to tell us what they need and how they need it and in what order. Resilience. I think about, can people make a meaningful connection? Can they tolerate uncertainty? You can think about your friend. You don't have to think about yourself here, all right? Because I don't want you to all get all bummed out about maybe I'm not so resilient after all. Just think of a friend when I go through this list, right? Can they tolerate uncertainty? Can they be with difficult emotions? I hate to say this, therapists are terrible. with being with painful feelings. It's ridiculous. But they have all the models in the world to help manage the feelings, EMDR, instead of be with the pain. Now, these models are effective, don't get me wrong. ABC, IFS, EMDR, they're effective. However, can we sit with painful emotion? Really challenging. Not relive it, be with it, not relive it. Capable or willing to learn from difficult emotions. Value others outside of ourselves. I think the world's doing a really poor job in this right now. Valuing other people outside of ourselves. Acknowledging vulnerability. These are some survival strategies. This is what I call them. I don't want you to go to a mental health provider and get rid of your depression or suicidality in 10 sessions so that the provider can get paid. These are survival strategies. We look at the intention of the survival strategy. Again, Elizabeth, we haven't met each other, and I'm like, she's just as right out of the trauma healing playbook without even knowing it, right? Her survival strategies were so clear, right? The intentions are good. The effects that they can have on other people, maybe not so good, but we're always focusing on the intention. The power of the pause. If I can leave you with anything, stop. Just stop it. Stop. Stop it all. We move so fast. We're trying so hard. Moments of healing happen when we stop, when we pause, when we go inside to be with our experience, not in it. I am constantly having my clients stop. Stop. I love the smiles that I'm seeing out here. It is one of the most powerful things we can do, is not do, but be with. We could do it for ourselves. We could do it with our kids. We could do it with our clients. Differentiation's important. Is this mine? Is this theirs? Is this mine today, or is this connected to mine back then, my history? Is this myself now, or is this my survival strategy speaking, or is this the part of me that carries the pain speaking? We mix this up all the time. What's mine, what's yours? What's past, what's present? What's a survival strategy, what's a wound? And when we get clear about these differences, things start coming into place. We all have the power and the control to heal. Here's what I'll end with here, folks. This is some of what neuroscience backs in regards to the steps of healing. I want people to know that it's possible. Once you've gotten connected to the place in you that carries the pain, it needs to share its experience with somebody. It's the holder of the pain, and it's going to hold it until it doesn't need to hold it anymore. That could be in a loving relationship. That could be with a therapist. That can be through meditation internally. The part that holds the pain needs to share the feelings, needs to share the physical sensations, not just the story. We all need a corrective experience. We give the part that holds the trauma what it needed and wanted and never gotten. To be seen, to be loved, to be heard, to be connected. Those corrective experiences happen all the time. And we want to stop and pause and encode them. They can happen in therapy. They can happen with a loving partner. They can happen with your kids. The corrective experiences accumulate, which are the antidote of the trauma. Then release is possible. Then release is possible. Then you don't need to carry what you've been holding, and it doesn't need to get channeled in your body in all kinds of ways. Thank you so much for listening to me and spending this time here. Thank you so much to the people who brought this work together. I believe this is a collective. I ain't the only one that's going to be bringing trauma healing to the world, I can tell you that. We all have to do it together collectively, so thank you for having us, and thank you for being here. Yeah.
Well, should I pause? Is that long enough? You got it. Thanks, Frank. That was terrific. Our final speaker today is Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who has changed the way the world, myself included, understands childhood adversity. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but I first heard Nadine speak in a viral TED Talk about childhood trauma. It so impressed me, I didn't know if I could get her to return a call, so I think I begged someone that worked for her to let me talk to her for 15 minutes, and she graciously finally accepted. Did we bribe you? Oh. We ended up spending about an hour together on the phone, and then we sent her the book, Hometown Betrayal, and to my surprise, kind of, a couple of weeks later, she called me back and said, "We've got to talk." And that talk was the beginning of a relationship that's been so fruitful and so important for us at GenerationAll, and we're so grateful for the time and that we've been able to spend together and how well we've been able to get to know you and what you're teaching us, which is so important. As I said, we became good friends. We share a common mission, and that is to bring awareness for ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and make trauma-informed care accessible to every child and family in the state of Utah. That's a big goal. And one of the reasons you're here today, whether you may know it or not, is that you need to be part of that movement. And so we invite you to join us at GenerationAll to do that. Nadine perfectly captures, through humor, intellect, and years of experience, the importance of screaming from the rooftops about ACEs. And sometimes she can really scream too. Your kids didn't tell me that. I experienced that in some of your time. She discusses the mental and physical health aspects and health impacts, reminds us of the importance of the early detection and intervention, so that she's become so an expert of. And we are honored to have her partner with us at GenerationAll. Here's her bio. Dr. Nadine Burke Harris is an award-winning physician, researcher, and public health leader who has spent her career on the front lines of some of the world's most pressing public health issues. As California's first ever Surgeon General, she helped guide the state's COVID response to achieve the lowest cumulative mortality of any large U.S. state. Among the throes of the COVID pandemic, I don't know how you did this with COVID going on, but Dr. Burke successfully launched a first-in-the-nation statewide effort that trained more than, it says here 40,000, but I was informed last night it's 50,000 now, primary care providers on how to screen for adverse childhood experiences and respond with trauma-informed care. Think of that, 50,000 clinicians trained because of the great work that you've done. So that is so impressive. Dr. Burke Harris's career has been dedicated to serving vulnerable communities and combating the root causes of health disparities. After completing her Master's of Public Health at Harvard and residency at Stanford, she founded a clinic in one of San Francisco's most unserved communities, Bayview, Hunters Point. She might talk about that a little bit today. It was there that Dr. Harris identified ACEs as a major risk factor affecting the health of her patients, children, and applied research from the CDC and Kaiser Permanente to develop a novel clinical approach. Her work has been profiled in best-selling books and award-winning films, as well as on BBC, NPR, CNN, Fox, USA Today, and the New York Times. Dr. Burke Harris' TED Talk that I saw, How Childhood Trauma Affects Health Across a Lifetime, has been viewed by more than 12,000,001 times. Actually, I've looked at it about 10 times, so 12,000,010 times. The Deepest Well, Healing Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity is a great book that she's written. It's called Indispensable by the New York Times. Beyond her professional achievements, Dr. Burke Harris is an avid gardener and finds joy in engaging her 4 boys in garden activities and adventures. She shares her passion for growing fruits and vegetables and flowers and her Instagram, and with her Instagram followers. So if you just type in Dr. Harris or Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, you'll get a good lesson on gardening. That's the first thing you'll learn. And it's very impressive, by the way. She describes her time in the garden as her ultimate stress buster. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Nadine Burke Harris.
Thank you so much, John. It is such a privilege and an honor to be here and have the opportunity to speak with you all today, and particularly with this really extraordinary panel. I think we heard about Elizabeth's experience, and we heard really from a mental health expert about that trauma is something that we can heal. Now, I came at this from a little bit different of a perspective. I came at this as a pediatrician. And as you heard when I started my clinic in Bayview, Hunters Point, way back, I guess now in 2007, and I was seeing patient after patient who were having some real, just kind of unusual medical challenges that were particularly difficult to treat. And so I wanted to start with sharing the story of one patient in particular. It's a story I tell in The Deepest Well. This was a 2-year, 9-month girl who came in for her well child exam. And she had been born healthy, normal developmental history. And when she was born, she was at the 50th percentile for height, 25th percentile for weight, and then she kept on, she wasn't growing. Her mom noticed that she was really small until ultimately she was at the 3rd percentile for height, weight, and head size. Now, her previous pediatrician had diagnosed her with what we call failure to thrive, and had prescribed the #1 treatment for failure to thrive. But it didn't seem to work. And so when she came to see me, I did the normal things that doctors do when we see a patient like this. I did a physical exam, I sent off some labs, drew some blood, I did a developmental screening, autism screening. And so here I was, I had this little girl who had failure to thrive. The treatment didn't seem to be working, and was trying to figure out what to do. Now, I had a little extra something that a lot of pediatricians at that point didn't have, which was in my clinic at that time, we were also screening for adverse childhood experiences. And the reason for that is because I had read the research around how adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, can affect children's developing brains and bodies. And what I saw on that screen was that this little girl had an ACE score of 7 plus 0, so 7 on the traditional ACEs. And then we also screened for some social drivers of health, and she didn't have any of those. and I was able to gain a very important insight about her biology. I was able to see that based on her ACE score, she was at high risk of having what we call a toxic stress physiology. Well, hang on. Let me pump the brakes. So ACEs, what are ACEs? I'm going to start by just level setting to make sure that we're all on the same page. You've heard a little bit about ACEs up until now, but what are they? Well, the term comes from this big research study that was done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, in which they asked 17,500 adults about their histories of stressful or potentially traumatic events that happened in childhood. And these include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, or growing up in a household where a parent experienced a mental health disorder, substance dependence, incarceration, where there was parental separation or divorce, or intimate partner violence. And the way that they did this was, for every one of these categories of experience a person had experienced, they would get a point on their ACE score. And when they looked at the data and compared them to health outcomes, there were two things that they really kind of groundbreaking things that they found. Now, the first thing that they found is that ACEs are incredibly common. So in this population at Kaiser San Diego, 17,500 folks, 2/3 of them had experienced at least one ACE, right? And 1 in 8 folks in the original study had experienced 4 or more. Since then, the CDC has started collecting this data and has this data for all 50 states, and it's actually around 1 in 6 adults nationally that has 4 or more ACEs. Here in Utah, roughly 2/3 of adults have experienced at least one, and 1 in 4 adults have experienced 3 or more ACEs. And we see it's a little bit more common in women than in men, right? And I think for a lot of folks who have experienced ACEs, so there's so many folks who think that it's just them, right? That this just happened to me. This was just my experience. And it turns out the data does not bear this out, right? This is incredibly common. And we see that kids in rural areas are at increased risk, more likely to experience ACEs. So we know that ACEs are incredibly common. So the second thing that they found was that there was this dose-response relationship between ACEs and physical, mental, and behavioral health outcomes, as well as social risks. So when I say dose-response relationship, what I mean is the higher the ACE score, the greater the risk. So when we look at things like high-risk drinking by number of ACEs, right, we see that dose-response relationship. When we look at early sexual initiation, that same dose-response relationship. Teen pregnancy. Substance use, right? We see that same dose-response relationship. Cumulative ACEs and mental health, right? Again, it is uncanny when you look at the data and you're just seeing the same pattern over and over and over again. When we look at risk of homelessness, right? That same dose-response relationship. Now, for a lot of folks, those patterns that I just showed you were, it kind of made sense. If you have a rough childhood, you may be more likely to drink or smoke or engage in high-risk behavior. I think where this was a real groundbreaker for a lot of folks was that same dose-response relationship exists for 9 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States, including heart disease, cancer, injury, stroke, chronic respiratory disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, kidney disease. So as a pediatrician, when I saw this, and I know it's my job to protect my patient's health, I really wanted to understand, how does this happen? to understand the biology, because those of you who have heard me speak before know that I am a self-confessed science nerd. And part of the reason for that is because science is such a powerful tool. When we understand not only what is happening, right, but which pathways are disrupted, that's what medicine is all about. It is about using that science to intervene so that we can get better outcomes. And it turns out that when we look at the relationship between ACEs and these physical, mental, and behavioral health risks, one of the key core mechanisms by which this happens has to do with our biological stress response. So I'm going to take a little moment here to talk a little bit about some science. Please forgive me, right? But it works a little something like this. So imagine you're walking in the forest and you see this guy, right? What happens? Our bodies actually have this incredibly sophisticated system to help us in these situations. So our amygdala, the brain's fear response, sounds the alarm, and it tells our brain and body to release stress hormones. So we release adrenaline and cortisol, and our hearts start to pound. Our pupils dilate, our airways open up. We shunt lots of blood to our big muscles for running and jumping, and away from that itty bitty muscle that holds your bladder closed, so you might pee your pants, but there's no judgment, right? So you are ready now to either fight that bear or run from the bear. But if you were to think about it, fighting a bear wouldn't seem like a good idea, would it? No, look at him. He's big, he's got teeth, he's got claws. And that's why your fear center actually sends projections to this part of the brain right here behind your forehead. It's the prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of the brain that's responsible for executive functioning, judgment, impulse control. And what it does is it turns it way down. Because the last thing you want if there's a forest and you're in a forest and there's a bear is some impulse control getting in the way of survival, right? And instead what it does is it turns up a part of the brain called the noradrenergic nucleus of the locus ceruleus, or as I like to call it, the part of the brain responsible for, I don't know karate, but I do know karate, right? This is our within the brain stress response center, and it gets us amped up. Now, the less obvious thing when we activate our stress response is that it also activates our immune response. Because if that bear gets his claws into you, you want your immune system to bring inflammation to stabilize that wound so you can live long enough to either beat that bear or get away. This is brilliant. It was evolved over millennia to save our lives from a mortal threat. But the problem is what happens when that bear comes home every night. And this biological process is activated over and over and over and over again. And it goes from being life-saving, right, or adaptive, to maladaptive or health damaging. Now, kids are especially sensitive to the repeated activation of the biological stress response because their brains and bodies are just developing. So high doses of adversity in childhood can affect the structure and function of children's developing brains. But also they're developing immune systems, their hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. And what we can see is a prolonged activation of the biological stress response in a way that disrupts this brain architecture and other organ systems that increases the risk for stress-related disease and cognitive impairment well into the adult years. This is what is referred to, this activation of the biological stress response and these long-term changes is what doctors now refer to as the toxic stress response. And one of the things that's really, was really fascinating and mind-blowing for me was a recognition that, as we heard earlier, right, that there can be intergenerational transmission of this activation of the stress response. Part of it is through behavior, right, parental behaviors, but also part of it is literally actually biological, and we see increased risk for stress-related outcomes in kids of adults who have experienced high ACEs themselves, right? And it gets even more, I think, a little bit interesting, because one of the things that we find, right, is this slide showing the biological systems disrupted by the toxic stress response is a very, very sciencey slide. I told you guys I kind of love science, but the point is just to know that we know, right? Advances the same way that the development of the microscope allowed us to be able to see microbes and be like, oh man, you mean infection is caused by these little critters that we can't see by the naked eye? But now we have the technology to be able to see it. In the same way, advances in technology allow us to be able to do things like functional MRI or looking at epigenetic regulation, and we're now actually able to measure, better than we ever have before, the impact of early adversity on kids' developing brains and bodies. So we're able to see changes to our neurologic system, our immune system, our hormonal systems, and our epigenetic regulation. And so we see this increased risk of intergenerational transmission. And one of the fascinating key findings, right, that the science is starting to show is that treatment of ACE-associated health conditions can be more difficult in people who have ACEs than in people who don't. You heard me talk earlier about my patient with failure to thrive, where the usual treatment didn't seem to be as effective. Similarly, research now, there are emerging studies that show that individuals who experience depression, who have a history of ACEs, when we look at, first-line therapy for depression, antidepressants, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they may not be as effective in individuals who have high ACEs as compared to individuals who don't. Similarly, we see emerging science that shows that for substance use treatment, right, for those who have ACEs, we see a dose-response relationship between those having more ACEs having a more difficult time with treatment efficacy as compared to those without ACEs. So what does this mean? Now, you all know that I would not get up here and show you a bunch of data, right, without sharing the part of it that I feel is so powerful, right? And what does the science tell us about a way forward? And what it tells us is that for individuals who have experienced ACEs, supplementing their whatever the usual care is, right? Whether that usual care is an SSRI or whether it is inpatient substance treatment or whether it's Pediasure, supplementing the usual care with interventions that are specifically targeted at regulating the stress response is an important part of managing health and preventing the intergenerational trauma. And so what does that mean? What are these interventions? Because we know that ACEs are not destiny. And with early detection and evidence-based intervention, we can improve outcomes. So the same way I showed that fancy slide with all of the things, all of the systems that are dysregulated with high doses of childhood adversity, there's also powerful data that show that supportive relationships, relational health, is associated with improved mental, cognitive, cardiovascular, and immune health, and it has also been shown to help to regulate the stress response system. Sleep. So one of the funny things, y'all ever notice that when you're stressed out, it's harder to sleep, and when you don't sleep, you are more easily stressed out? That's because our stress response system calibrates itself while we're sleeping. It resets. So sleep hygiene is a really important intervention for anyone who has had a history of trauma. Stuff that you've probably heard before, going to bed and waking up at the same time each day, right? Avoiding caffeine past a certain point, avoiding alcohol before you go to bed, having these calming routines before bedtime. So having good sleep hygiene is actually a really important part of helping to regulate our stress response. Nutrition. Certain dietary strategies like the Mediterranean diet reduces inflammation, reduces risk of depression, reduces risk of cardiovascular disease, and is an important part of helping to regulate the stress response. So anti-inflammatory diet, we know that the toxic stress response has a key inflammation component, which can also affect our mood. So diet is a really key part. Physical activity. Physical activity is associated with improved memory, attention, learning, psychosocial function, and immune function, and it also helps to regulate our biological stress response, right? So the fun part about it is we can measure the ways in which it goes wrong, but we can also measure what are the interventions that make a difference to help to regulate our stress response. Mindfulness practices like meditation are associated with cardiovascular and immune health, decreased parental stress, improved caregiver-child relationship, and again, regulation of that biological stress response, regulation of cortisol levels, right? And experiencing nature. There was a study that I read that was so cool. They actually put EEGs. Y'all know what EEGs are? It's called an electroencephalogram, and it measures brain waves. And they had folks walk through a dense urban environment and then go out into a beautiful natural environment and experience nature. And it turns out that going out into nature is associated with decreased activation of our fight or flight response, right, our sympathetic nervous system, and increased activation of our parasympathetic nervous system, the resting and digesting that counteracts the stress response. And they were able to measure that on EEG. So experiencing nature, as you heard with my gardening habit, that's one of my favorite interventions. And then, of course, mental health care. Trauma-informed mental health interventions are associated with improved cortisol regulation and other biomarkers of toxic stress, as well as improved symptomatology. So, as I was in the Surgeon General's office, we took all of this data, thousands and thousands of studies, and essentially put it together in what we call the wellness wheel, these evidence-based buffering interventions to help to regulate the stress response. And researchers have actually looked, so, okay, you might be able to measure it on MRI, or you might be able to look at markers of inflammation and see there's a difference. But does it really, I'm a public health person, right? Does it really make a difference for people on the population level? And there was a researcher in Wales, Mark Bellis, he's one of the most senior researchers in this area, looking at, data. We see the impact of ACEs on health-harming behaviors and lower mental well-being. No surprise, we see that dose-response relationship. But then he looked at what happens when people get access to these buffering interventions. And what he saw was both in mental health outcomes and then also in physical outcomes, we see a reduction in symptomatology by as much as 59%. All right, so have I convinced you? Do people believe me that there are interventions that we can do, right? And that they're important? So how does the science help improve outcomes for the little girl in my patient who wasn't, the little girl in my clinic who wasn't growing, right? Well, it turns out that one of the most effective interventions to help to regulate the stress response, especially for young children, right, kids under 5, is an intervention called child-parent psychotherapy. And this intervention is associated with regulating cortisol levels and also reducing epigenetic age acceleration. This is a dyadic intervention. It's a parent-child together. And when this therapist works with the parent and child together with a focus on the relationship and helping the parent develop tools, right? So let me just pause to say, you guys understand that oftentimes, most often, when we see a child who has high ACEs, oftentimes the caregiver, the parent or caregiver, has their own high ACEs. We just heard from Dr. Frank about how these things get handed down. So a critical intervention is helping parents develop the tools to identify their own ACEs, help to be able to regulate their own behavior so that they can be attuned and be responsive to their child. And this is associated, now we can measure it. We knew it was good for kids, but now we can measure that it actually is associated with improved cortisol regulation and delayed epigenetic age acceleration. And so that's what we did. So in addition to the PediaSure, the #1 treatment for failure to thrive, we added evidence-based treatment for regulating the stress response. And this is what happened. Over the next 18 months, that child went from a growth rate of 2.3 centimeters per year to over 7 centimeters per year. We are talking about the rate at which her body lays down long bone, okay? We are talking about a change to her biology because of this treatment intervention to address the impact of stress physiology. Now, as an interesting corollary, her 9-month-old brother, who I saw him second, he wasn't actually the index patient originally, he had had 4 ear infections, 2 pneumonias in his first year of life. He was 9 months old. His ACE score was 5. And when we did this child-parent psychotherapy intervention, the amazing thing was this child who wasn't having issues with growth, but the way that it showed up for him was in his immune system, because for some individuals, it's with their hormonal system. For some, it's with their mental health or their neurologic system. For some, it's with their immune system. For him, it was with his immune system. After that 18 months of child-parent psychotherapy, he had no more ear infections, not another pneumonia, and many fewer respiratory infections. So, understanding the science of how early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of kids offers us powerful insights as to how we can, #1, improve health outcomes, and #2, help to break intergenerational cycles. And one thing that is critically clear, right, is that when we think about a public health approach, that's one patient. I was seeing in my clinic patients coming in with asthma that was difficult to treat and manage with standard asthma medications, with diabetes, with autoimmune disease, right? And for all of my patients who had these conditions and also had high ACEs, we were delivering these interventions. But guess what? It was really hard to do. You know why? Try getting wraparound services or a mental health intervention for a patient who doesn't have a mental health diagnosis. right? In fact, the mental health provider couldn't even get paid. So we had to be fundraising to try and pay these folks, home visitors, community health workers, mental health professionals, to do what we knew the science said is the right treatment for our patients. So when I had the privilege of being appointed California's first Surgeon General, I made it my mission to align our systems with the science. And one of the things that public health tells us is you got to do this thing called primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Primary prevention, preventing something from happening in the first place. Secondary prevention is early detection, so you can do early intervention when the treatment is more likely to be effective, right? And tertiary prevention is treatment after you've already seen symptomatology or developed outcomes, and you're trying to treat it to prevent it from getting worse. And I just want to give a brief example of what that looks like. One of the things that the science tells us is that we have to intervene early. Right? I sat on this committee for the National Academy of Sciences, and they say intervene early when biologically a number of critical systems are developing and humans have high plasticity, right, during this. So we're going to take advantage of that plasticity for healing. And what we did in California was we created, did I go backwards? No, let me see. Okay, we really created a coordinated public health approach. I would say one of the biggest challenges that we have is that when it comes to addressing the impact of early adversity and trauma, okay, keep in mind, we got 2/3 of Americans that have experienced at least one ACE, right? 1 in 6 folks have experienced 4 or more. And yet our solutions are very individual. The scope of the problem is a public health problem, but our interventions are one at a time. We're not using public health approaches to our interventions. And so we really looked at raising public awareness, strengthening protective factors in relational health, screening in primary care for early detection and evidence-based intervention, trauma-informed treatment approaches, right, across the board, multidisciplinary networks of care, and culturally and linguistically appropriate supports. And so we launched this initiative called ACEs Aware. And that model, first thing that we did, so up until that point, if a doctor wanted to screen for ACEs, there's no reimbursement for it, right? There's no infrastructure to help them or support them do it. So we said, you know what? We're going to pay our primary care doctors to do it. And we're not going to wait until someone has a mental health condition, right? We're going to screen, we're going to have our pediatricians and our family medicine docs, right, screening, so we can identify which patients are at high risk of having this dysregulated stress response, and then we can treat that with these evidence-based interventions. So we're gonna pay them for doing it, we're gonna train them how to do it, and then the third piece, and this is my most important and my favorite part, we're gonna make eligibility for services based on risk rather than based on harm. So before that, in order to get access to care, a person needed a diagnosis, right? And pretty much they needed a mental health diagnosis. So my patient with failure to thrive, that wasn't covered by insurance. We had to raise money for that. But if someone had a mental health diagnosis, then they could get services. But here's the challenge. We can look at the data and know that the higher the ACE score, the greater the risk. Why are we waiting for someone to develop to become symptomatic before we give them access to care? Imagine if we did that with breast cancer, right? Imagine that in order to get access to treatment for breast cancer, you need to be overtly symptomatic. You had to have a big lump, you had to have bone pain or weight loss and chills, what would happen? We would identify more individuals at stage 4, right? But the problem with that is that the 5-year survival for stage 4 breast cancer is in the 20-something%. So if you're a patient or if you're a provider, you're going to think, boy, it's really hard to treat. But what's the 5-year survival for stage 1 breast cancer? More than 99%, okay? So if you care about people with breast cancer, you want to make sure that we identify early, right? This is what the National Academies told us, is that we do screening. You can't identify stage 1 breast cancer if you're not doing screening. So we're screening to do early detection so that we can do early and evidence-based intervention. And the way that we did this was by, like I said, embedding this in our systems. If we want doctors to do things, one of the best ways to be able to implement that is to reimburse for it through Medicaid. And so we built it as part of our Medicaid system. We created this ACEs Aware initiative to train clinicians on how to screen and how to respond with evidence-based trauma-informed care. And then we said the eligibility for the services that are already covered, right, is based on risk rather than based on harm. I want to show you what this looks like, right? And when we did that, we said, okay, we're going to bring together a network of care, the folks who can do these interventions, these evidence-based interventions to support folks. So this is what it looked like. In our LA County pilot, these are the eligibility data based on diagnosis. Substance abuse, depression, suicidal ideation, lack of adequate housing, foster care status, autism, ACEs 4 or more is that bar in the right. Dramatically increased eligibility for, this is enhanced care management, which is wraparound services for our patient based on ACEs. So we improved the eligibility. Then what? We actually looked, just because they're eligible, does that mean that they're actually even getting referred? Now, this is a dose-response relationship that I like to see. When we look at ACE scores compared to referrals to social service referrals, we see that the higher the ACE score, the more likely our families were to actually get to be referred to the services that they need, right? And we also did, so that was for social service referrals. We also looked at some of the services are provided by community-based organizations. And so this is referrals to community organizations through a platform called 1 Degree, right? In that dark orangey red, we see 4 more ACEs, highest number of referrals. That makes all the sense in the world. In the green is 1 to 3 ACEs. Again, right, we're seeing this dose-response relationship. In the purple is 0 ACEs. So wait a minute, if purple is 0 ACEs, what's in the light blue? Light blue is not screened, right? So we see that our patients who were screened for ACEs, even if they had 0 ACEs, were more likely to be referred, in part because they're more likely to have been seen by a provider who recognizes, right, that the factors that can affect child and family well-being, and by the way, who also recognizes that the 10 ACE categories are not the only categories that can increase the risk for toxic stress, and so may be referring, right, for something that wasn't necessarily on the list. We also saw that our systems, when we do this right, fine, they're referred, but are they actually getting the service? And in our LA County pilot, we saw that the time for a closed loop referral, the time between when they were referred to when they actually got services and there was information coming back to the provider, went from 120 days to 20 days, right? Why did we see that? Because prior to implementing this ACEs Aware initiative, if providers, if something came in, it came in. If there was something where someone was obviously symptomatic, then that was one thing. But when we said, hey, no, we're going to intentionally be inquiring. We're going to be screening for ACEs, and that means we have to build an infrastructure that's able to respond. And so it was really through these investments in our infrastructure to be able to respond, do we see these improvements in referral time and system improvements. And of course, I wouldn't be up here talking to y'all if we did not see also improved health outcomes, right? And so this is data, again, from our LA pilot showing that this was youth who were also had depression symptoms and also had high ACEs. And so they were referred to an evidence-based virtual mindfulness intervention. And we saw a reduction in depression symptoms and also in anxiety symptoms. Since January of 2020, more than 4.5 million ACE screens have taken place in California. More than a third of California's children on Medicaid have been screened for ACEs. And one of the things I love about the way that this conversation has gone today is that we have gone really from that powerful individual story about childhood sexual abuse to moving to treatments and looking at mental health interventions to heal from trauma, to now recognizing that we can do this in a broad-based way. There are public health approaches that we can take to make sure that these, the access to healing is not a one-off, right? That it's not just for one child, but for every child and family. And one of the things that I feel like it's really important for me to say, we had this evaluated by the RAND Corporation, and they found that it was feasible, acceptable, benefit patients, and they did not see any lasting adverse events from ACE screening, which is something that we're always vigilant for. We can do this, you guys. We can do this, but the way that we do this, the only way we do this is together. And it requires, honestly, every single person in this room. I am here because John sweet talked me into coming out to Utah. Our organization, the ACE Resource Network, really has made it our mission to make the prevention, early detection, and evidence-based treatment of toxic stress a standard part of healthcare practice in the US. And really it's around helping to have that clear standard of care, helping states be able to do this work, and establishing a national hub to uplift best practices. And because not only do we see, better care, better outcomes for individuals, but we also see that we can't afford not to do this. There was recently a study published by the Agency for Healthcare Quality and Research, the AHRQ, which is a federal organization, and they estimated that 28.6% of current Medicaid expenditures are excess expenditures due to ACEs, are solely due to ACEs, right? So it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Because not only are we spending this money in Medicaid, right? But we also see we're spending it in healthcare, we're spending it in housing, we're spending it in law enforcement, right? We see again that with early detection and early intervention, the ROI on our investment stands to be gained across our systems. So our organization, ACE Resource Network, we have just created a learning collaborative to help state Medicaid agencies learn together on how to put in place the policies that allow for early detection, early and evidence-based intervention, and then access to treatments and services. We currently are launching that in January of 2026, and I am so pleased, y'all, that Utah was the first state to sign up. And it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us to be all in for all of Utah. You all, you don't need to boil the ocean. You just need to play your position. If you are an individual, a parent, a concerned citizen, one of the things that you can do leaving here today is talk to your provider. And for some reason, all the formatting on this is weird, but really saying, hey, I recently learned how ACEs can potentially impact health. Would you be willing to learn along with me? How can we use what we know about the toxic stress response to improve my health or my child's health outcomes? And then get involved with GenerationAll, with Trauma Informed Utah. GenerationAll has brought together so many partners, the Policy Project, Voices for Utah Children. We are working together to really build the system of care here in Utah. And finally, for folks who are looking for resources, I just wanted to share a list of resources that are here in Utah in terms of in addressing domestic violence, mental health, family therapy, just services for individuals who have been impacted by trauma or particularly child sexual abuse. The time is now. I'm going to tell you, as a public health person, right, when we apply public health tools, we can see transformative change. So between 1996 and 2016, we saw teen smoking in the US go from 25% to 3.6%. We did that in one generation. Between 1976 and 1996, we saw the rate of lead poisoning drop dramatically across the US, right? And I think there are many folks in this room who remember when HIV was a death sentence. 30 years ago, the mean mortality from HIV was 6 months. 50% of people had died within 6 months of diagnosis. And today, on standard antiretroviral therapy, the life expectancy for someone diagnosed with HIV is the same as the general population, right? We did that in 30 years. I believe that with a partnership with GenerationAll, in one generation, we can transform outcomes related to ACEs, early childhood trauma, with early detection, early intervention, evidence-based care, and wraparound services. Every one of us has a role to play, and I'm going to leave you all finally with just some resources for educators building resilience and students impacted by adverse childhood experiences. Surgeon General's report, I know y'all will read it cover to cover, all 400 pages. And I think I'll have a second to sign a few copy of my book, The Deepest Well. And I really am grateful for your time, for your partnership. We can do this work together. Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys, everyone, for being here. My name is Sage Hancock. I'm the director of GenerationAll. And we were going to do a panel, but As you can see, we are kind of just listening to speakers, having an incredible time, and I don't know if your stress response is activated by another appointment or something else that you have later today, but I'm choosing to activate my own stress response and speak instead of moderating a panel. And so I just wanted to kind of recap and just maybe share some next steps with you guys. We had 3 very incredible speakers who their expertise overlaps, but it's all very unique. And they're also 3 published authors. I'm just going to throw that out there, and they have their books over there. So if you want to buy those and kind of take that into your fall and winter reading, highly encourage it. And like Nadine said, she'll even be signing some as well. Additionally, they also, all 3 of them, are part of or have their own incredible organizations. GenerationAll, we started only a year ago. We're a small, scrappy organization, but we're trying to make a really big impact. And we know that we cannot do it alone. Like Nadine just said, you can't boil the ocean, but a rising tide does raise all ships. So we have incredible partners that are all Utah-based that we would love for you to go around and chat with them. GenerationAll's mission to minimize the generational impact of sexual abuse. It started by focusing on sexual abuse and sexual violence, but we very quickly realized that in order to make an impact not only for the children that we focus on, but also preventing sexual assault and intimate partner violence later, we really had to address childhood trauma as a whole. So that's why we're here today. That's why we're here in Utah. We have a very big goal to do this together in Utah in the next few years. And we would love for you guys to get involved. There's this sheet on all of your guys' seats. There's a little QR code right here to get involved. We would love to have you be involved with what we're doing. Over the next year, we're going to be focusing on training for all of our pediatricians through Nadine's incredible organization. We're also going to be focusing on policy efforts as well as wraparound services and making them more available and more known here in Utah. So we'd love to work with you guys. Please reach out to us. And we are so grateful for you taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here with us. Thank you.